Every morning for 5 years, she stood on that corner and became the only person who protected him. The other kids called him names. They shoved him. They made him believe he was nothing. But she was there every single day, her neon vest a shield, her presence the only thing standing between a bullied 9-year-old and a world that had already given up on him. She didn't know who his father was. Then one afternoon, a fleet of black cars shut down the entire street, and a powerful-looking man in a dark suit stepped out and walked straight toward the child she'd quietly defended. Her name is Patricia W. She's a school crossing guard in Memphis, Tennessee. For 5 years, she'd been the only adult who made a bullied boy named Marcus feel protected. She gave him food, safety, and a reason to keep going. She never expected anything in return. But the man walking toward her now was Marcus's father, and he had the power to change her life forever if he chose to see her at all. Patricia had worked that same corner for 12 years. Every morning, every afternoon, rain or sun, she raised her stop paddle and shepherded children across a 4-lane road where drivers routinely ignored the 20 miles per hour school zone sign. She knew every child by name, every backpack by color, every parent by the car they drove. She was 66 years old, a retired nurse's aide, a grandmother of 4, and she took her job more seriously than anyone the school district had ever employed. Not because the pay was good. It wasn't. She made $11.40 an hour, but she believed a crossing guard wasn't just there to stop traffic. She was the first adult a child saw when they arrived at school and the last one they saw before they went home. That meant something to her. It meant she had a chance every single day to set the tone for how a child felt about the world. Then Marcus showed up. He was 8 years old the first time Patricia noticed him, new to the school, small for his age, with glasses that were already held together with tape. He didn't walk to the corner with a group. He didn't shout to friends or laugh at jokes. He walked alone, head down, shoulders hunched, holding his backpack straps like they might save him from something. Patricia noticed. She noticed everything. She'd learned to read children the way she'd once read patient charts, looking for signs that something wasn't right. And everything about Marcus told her something was very, very wrong. She found out quickly. A group of older boys had already targeted him. They called him names in the hallway. They tripped him at recess. They took his lunch money, and when he didn't have any, they took his lunch. One morning, Marcus showed up at the corner with a bruise on his forearm shaped like fingerprints. Patricia asked him what happened. He said he fell. She didn't believe him for a second, but she also knew that pushing a scared child too hard only makes them retreat further. So she did something else instead. She handed him a granola bar. It was the extra one she brought every day for herself. That's all she had. Marcus took it, looked at her with eyes that seemed decades older than his face, and said thank you. That was the first day. The next morning, Patricia brought 2 granola bars. The morning after that, she brought a sandwich. By the end of the first month, she was packing a full extra lunch every single day, tucking it into Marcus's backpack when no one was looking, so the bullies couldn't take it. When it rained, she made sure he had a dry place to stand under the awning. When the older boys waited for him on the far side of the street, she walked across with him and stood between them until they scattered. She never raised her voice, never made a scene. She just made herself a wall, solid and immovable, and she told Marcus quietly, "You walk tall, baby. You deserve to be here. You walk tall." Marcus didn't talk much, not at first. But over time, as weeks turned into months and months turned into years, he started talking. He told her about his mother, who worked double shifts at a nursing home and came home so tired she fell asleep in her uniform. He told her about his father, who wasn't around, who he'd never really known. He told her about the bullies, but only the small things. He didn't tell her the worst things, the things that made him cry alone in his room at night. But Patricia knew. She'd seen the worst of what kids could do to each other. She'd seen the way Marcus flinched when other children raised their hands too fast. She'd seen the bruises he couldn't explain, the way his grades were slipping, the way his shoulders got lower and lower as the years went on. She knew he was drowning slowly, in full view of an entire school, and not one teacher or administrator was throwing him a rope. His mother came to see Patricia once. Marcus had mentioned her to his mom, and she wanted to meet the crossing guard he talked about. She was a thin woman with eyes just as tired as her son's, wearing scrubs that smelled like the nursing home. She stood at the corner and watched Patricia place a sandwich in Marcus's backpack and give his shoulder a gentle squeeze. Later, she called Patricia on the phone. "My son told me you make sure he's safe," she said, "that you give him food when he's hungry, that you smile at him when other people look away." her voice cracked. I can't tell you what that means. I'm barely keeping a roof over our heads. I'm all he has. Thank you for being there when I can't be. Patricia told her it was her honor, because it was. She didn't need payment. She didn't need recognition. She needed to know that when she went home at night, she'd done something that mattered. But here's the thing about a child who's being systematically destroyed. You can feed him. You can protect him for 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the afternoon. But you can't stop the 8 hours in between. And by the time Marcus was in 6th grade, the bullying had escalated to something Patricia couldn't shield him from. A group of boys cornered him after school, beat him badly enough to draw blood, and left him crumpled against the chain-link fence behind the gymnasium. A teacher found him an hour later, still on the ground. The school called his mother. They filed an incident report. They suspended the boys for 3 days, and then they did nothing else. Patricia stood at the corner 3 days later when Marcus came back to school. His face was still bruised. His eyes were empty. He walked past her without a word, and she felt something inside her break. She didn't know that the next afternoon, a fleet of black cars would shut down the entire street. And she didn't know that the man who stepped out of the lead car was Marcus's father, a man he'd never met, who had suddenly reappeared with the power to change everything. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. The final bell had rung 15 minutes earlier, and Patricia was doing what she always did, standing with her back to the traffic, eyes scanning the sidewalk for Marcus. He appeared at the far end of the block, walking slower than usual, his head so low she thought he might be counting cracks in the concrete. He didn't look up at her, not once, and that alone told her something was very wrong. Then the black cars came. The first one turned the corner without slowing, a long sedan with tinted windows so dark they swallowed the sun. Behind it, a second identical car, then a third. By the time the lead vehicle stopped in the crosswalk directly in front of Patricia, 4 more had blocked every lane of traffic, and an unnatural silence fell over the street. The few parents waiting on the opposite curb froze. A teacher halfway out the school gate stopped mid-stride. Patricia's hand tightened on her stop paddle. She had no idea what was happening. For a split second, her mind went to the darkest possible place. She thought this was the kind of threat you never saw coming, the kind that made the news cycle and left a community in mourning. Then the door of the lead car opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that probably cost more than Patricia earned in 2 months. He moved with the coiled stillness of someone who had spent years learning how to command a room without raising his voice. 2 men in suits flanked him immediately, but he waved them back with a single, almost imperceptible gesture. He wasn't here to intimidate. He was here for something else entirely. He walked directly toward Marcus. Patricia's heart slammed against her ribs. She stepped forward instinctively, placing herself between the man and the boy, her paddle still raised like a barrier. "Sir, you need to back up, now." Her voice was iron. She'd used it on reckless drivers and belligerent parents, and once on a man who tried to pull a child into a van. She'd never once been afraid to use it. The man stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the small boy behind her, and then his face did something Patricia didn't expect. It crumpled. Not in tears, but in a way that told her he was barely holding something enormous inside his chest. "Is that Marcus? That's my son. I'm his father." Patricia didn't move. "His father isn't around. I've known Marcus for 5 years. I've met his mother. I've never seen you." The man nodded slowly. He wasn't offended. He almost looked grateful that someone was protecting his child this fiercely. "You're right. I haven't been there. I didn't even know he existed until 3 days ago. And I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I'm here now. I need to make this right." Behind Patricia, Marcus made a sound, a sharp, ragged breath, like a child who'd just been plunged into cold water. He'd heard the man's voice, and Patricia realized with a jolt that Marcus recognized it, not from memory, because he'd never met the man, but from something deeper. The way a child knows the cadence of their own name in a stranger's mouth. The man's name was Vincent Cade. He was 43 years old. He'd grown up in the same neighborhood as Marcus's mother, Cynthia, and they'd been together for less than a year more than a decade ago. Then Vincent's older brother got into trouble with the wrong people, and Vincent made a choice that changed the trajectory of his entire life. He agreed to become an informant, a witness, someone who helped the authorities dismantle a criminal network from the inside. For his own safety and the safety of anyone connected to him, he was relocated, given a new identity, told to cut every single tie and never look back. He didn't know Cynthia was pregnant when he left. She never told him. She was afraid that if the wrong people found out, they'd use their child as leverage. So she raised Marcus alone, in poverty, in fear, keeping the secret locked so tight it nearly crushed her. And Vincent, a man who'd spent 15 years building a technology empire from scratch with the money he'd earned from a new life, a man who now ran a multi-billion-dollar security firm that protected government officials and corporate executives worldwide, had no idea he had a son until a private investigator he hired to tie up loose ends from his past handed him a photograph of a 12-year-old boy with his eyes and his mother's tired smile. The photo had been taken outside a school, the same school Patricia guarded every day, and in the background of that photo, a woman in a neon yellow vest was handing the boy a sandwich. Vincent knew within minutes that his son had been suffering. The investigator's report was thorough. The bullying, the beatings, the suspension that lasted 3 days while Marcus sat home with bruises and the school did nothing. Vincent Cade was a man who had spent his adult life protecting people from threats. And he'd failed to protect his own child from the one threat that should have been stopped by the adults paid to keep him safe. He was here to fix that. He was here to see the one person who had actually shown up when he hadn't. And he was here to burn down everything in his path if it meant his son never had to be afraid again. But the one thing Vincent didn't understand yet, the thing Patricia understood in her bones, because she'd been a crossing guard for 12 years and a nurse's aide for 20 before that, was that a child who has been broken by the world doesn't heal just because someone shows up with power and good intentions. A child who has learned that adults will hurt you or ignore you will not automatically trust a father who appears like a ghost with a conv. And the bullies who had beaten Marcus bloody behind the gymnasium were not going to stop just because a man in a suit told them to. They were going to get angrier. And that meant Marcus was about to become the most dangerous thing a bullied child can become, the center of attention. The entire street had seen the black cars. The entire school was about to know exactly who Marcus Cade really was. And that knowledge was about to put a target on his back that Patricia could not shield with a stop paddle or a granola bar or a soft voice that said, "You walk tall, baby." Vincent knelt down on the asphalt, looked his son in the eyes for the first time in 12 years, and said the words he'd been rehearsing for 3 days. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry I didn't know. I will spend the rest of my life making this right if you let me." Marcus stared at him. The same eyes, Patricia noticed. The same deep brown, the same weight. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, a boy who had learned never to trust the ground beneath his feet because it always crumbled. And Patricia, still holding her paddle, realized that the hardest part of this story wasn't the arrival. It was what came next. Because Vincent Cade was about to declare war on the school system that had failed his son, and the first casualty of that war would almost certainly be the one person who had actually been saving him all along. Vincent Cade did exactly what powerful men do when they discover their child has been broken by a system they paid for with their tax dollars. He went to war. Within 48 hours, a team of lawyers from his firm had filed a civil rights complaint against the school district, alleging deliberate indifference to severe and pervasive bullying. They subpoenaed incident reports, disciplinary records, and internal emails. They identified the 4 boys who had beaten Marcus behind the gymnasium and prepared to sue their families individually. Vincent wasn't interested in settlements. He wanted blood. He wanted the principal removed, the superintendent embarrassed, and every teacher who had looked the other way publicly named and shamed. He held a press conference on the steps of the school board building, flanked by cameras he'd invited himself, and he described in graphic detail what had been done to his son while the adults in charge did nothing. The story went viral within hours. Every local news affiliate ran segments with headlines like "Bullied Boy's Billionaire Father Takes on School District." National outlets picked it up, and sitting alone in the small apartment she shared with her mother, Cynthia watched her ex-partner, a man she had hidden her pregnancy from out of fear, weaponize their son's pain on television. She felt sick. She wanted justice too, but she also knew something Vincent hadn't considered. Bullies don't stop when a camera shows up. They get angrier. And in the court of middle school opinion, the kid whose rich dad sued everyone instantly becomes a target of a different kind, the kind of target painted with resentment, jealousy, and the cruel logic of children who blame the victim for making their lives harder. At the school, the fallout was immediate. The 4 boys Vincent had named were suspended indefinitely pending expulsion hearings. Their parents were furious, not at their sons, at Marcus, at his father. They showed up at the school board meeting and screamed about their children's futures being ruined by a rich man's vendetta. The bullies themselves, now angry and emboldened despite their suspensions, used social media to spread rumors that Marcus had lied, that his father was trying to destroy the school, that Marcus was a snitch who got everyone in trouble. Within a week, the entire student body had turned against him. He walked the hallways alone, but now the hostility wasn't just from a few older boys. It came from everywhere. Students spat at his feet. Teachers grew cold, afraid that anything they said would be recorded and used in a lawsuit. Nobody wanted to be in the splash zone of Vincent Cade's righteous fury. And the only person who still treated Marcus like a human being, the only adult who hadn't changed the way she looked at him, was Patricia. But Patricia was in trouble too. The school district had launched its own investigation, not into the bullying, but into Patricia. They pulled her personnel file. They interviewed other crossing guards. They claimed to be looking into irregularities, but everyone knew what was really happening. They were trying to find a reason to fire her before Vincent could use her as a witness. Patricia had been feeding Marcus for years. She'd walked him across the street and stood between him and his tormentors. She'd heard his mother's tearful confession that she couldn't protect him. If this went to court, Patricia's testimony would be devastating to the district. So they started building a case against her, combing through time sheets, looking for minor infractions, anything they could use to paint her as a well-meaning but unprofessional employee who had overstepped her boundaries and created a liability. They found nothing substantial, but they didn't need to. They just needed to intimidate her. A deputy superintendent called her into a meeting and told her, in carefully neutral language, that if she cooperated with the Cade lawsuit, she would be putting her employment at risk. Patricia sat across from him in her neon yellow vest, her gray hair pulled back, her hands folded on the table. She listened to everything he said. Then she stood up. "I've been on that corner for 12 years. I've seen children nearly hit by cars because your drivers ignore the speed limit. I've seen kids cry because they're scared to go inside that building. I'm not going to stop telling the truth just because you want me to. If you fire me, you fire me, but I will not be silent." She walked out of the meeting and went straight back to her corner because it was a Tuesday afternoon and the children needed to cross the street safely, and Patricia did not abandon her post. Then the worst thing happened. A week after Vincent's press conference, Marcus disappeared. He didn't show up at school. He didn't appear at Patricia's corner in the afternoon. Cynthia called Vincent in a panic. The police were alerted. For 6 hours, no one knew where he was. And when they finally found him, it was in a drainage ditch behind the abandoned gas station on the edge of the neighborhood, the same place the older kids went to drink and fight and do the things adults pretended not to know about. He was conscious, but barely. He had been jumped by the bullies' older brothers, teenagers who had decided to deliver their own kind of justice. They'd recorded the whole thing on a phone, a video that would later circulate through the student body, showing Marcus on his knees with his glasses shattered beside him while off-camera voices laughed and called him the reason their brothers got expelled. Patricia found out from Cynthia, who called her sobbing from the hospital parking lot. Marcus had a fractured rib, a concussion, and a wound above his eye that required 14 stitches. The police arrested two 16-year-olds that night. The school's reaction was silence. No statement, no emergency meeting, no acknowledgement that the system they were supposed to run had just produced an attempted lynching on social media. The district's only public comment was a terse line about cooperating with law enforcement. And the lawyer Vincent had hired told him that the civil case, while winnable, would take years. And in the meantime, Marcus would have to keep attending that school, passing those hallways, sitting in those classrooms, because there was no legal mechanism to instantly transfer a child. The system Vincent wanted to destroy was the only system his son had, and it was failing him again, in real time, while the cameras were still rolling. Vincent sat in a plastic chair in the hospital waiting room, his head in his hands, his perfect suit wrinkled, his empire forgotten. Patricia walked in. She'd come straight from her corner, still wearing her vest. He looked up at her with the hollow eyes of a man who had just learned that all the money and power in the world can't undo a fractured rib or a video shared 1,000 times. "I thought I could fix this," he said. "I thought if I came in hard enough, they'd listen. Instead, I made everything worse. I put a bigger target on him. And you're the one who's been protecting him all this time, and now your job is at risk because of me." Patricia sat down next to him. She didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. She didn't say, "You meant well," because intentions didn't heal bones. She just sat there the way she'd sat with so many scared children over the years and let the silence do its work. Then she spoke. "You can't fight this with lawsuits and press conferences, Mr. Cade. That's not how you protect a child. You protect a child by being there every day, even when it's boring. You protect them by making them feel seen. You can't sue bullies into kindness. You have to teach it. You have to build a school where kindness matters more than anything else. And you can't do that from a courtroom." Vincent looked at her, this 66-year-old woman in a yellow vest who made $11.40 an hour, and he realized she knew more about protecting children than anyone in his entire organization. And that's when he understood what he had to do. Not sue, not threaten, build with her. Vincent Cade withdrew every lawsuit the following Monday. His legal team was stunned. The school district braced for a settlement demand that never came. Instead, Vincent walked into the superintendent's office with no lawyers, no cameras, no fury. He had one request: put Patricia in charge, not of a crossing corner, of an entire initiative. He proposed fully funding the Patricia W. Safe Passage Program, a district-wide anti-bullying framework designed not by consultants or bureaucrats, but by the woman who had spent 12 years watching children cross the street and knowing which ones were drowning. The program did three things. First, it trained every adult in the school system: teachers, aides, cafeteria workers, janitors, bus drivers, and most importantly, crossing guards, to recognize the signs of bullying and intervene before it escalated. Second, it created a peer mentorship program where older students were assigned to protect and befriend at-risk younger children, with the understanding that protection wasn't punitive, it was relational. Third, it established a direct reporting line that bypassed the administrative chain entirely, so no child's cry for help could ever again get lost in a principal's inbox. Patricia was named director of the program at a salary of $75,000 a year, more than 5 times what she'd made as a crossing guard. She still insisted on working her corner every morning because that's where the children were, and she wasn't about to leave them now. Marcus came back to school 3 weeks after the attack. His ribs had healed enough, and the concussion protocols had cleared him, but the deeper wounds were still raw. Cynthia walked him to Patricia's corner on his first morning back, her hand on his shoulder, her eyes scanning the block like she expected another car full of teenagers. Patricia was waiting. She had a new stop paddle, a gift from Vincent, with the program's logo on it, a silhouette of a child crossing safely under the watch of an adult. But she didn't mention any of that. She just handed Marcus a sandwich, turkey and cheese on wheat, the same one she'd been giving him for years, and said, "I'm glad you're here, baby. Today is a new day." Marcus took the sandwich. For the first time in months, he looked her in the eyes, and he smiled. It was a small smile, fragile and uncertain, but it was real. Cynthia started crying right there on the corner, and Patricia wrapped her arms around both of them while the morning traffic waited patiently for the first time in memory, because Vincent's security team had blocked the street for the drop-off, and nobody was honking. The bullies who had beaten Marcus were expelled permanently. The older brothers who recorded the assault were convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to juvenile detention. But Vincent didn't stop at punishment. He funded counseling for the expelled students and their families, because a child who learns to break others has often been broken themselves, and breaking the cycle required more than banishment. He made sure every student in the district had access to mental health resources, not just the victim. And he embedded one non-negotiable rule into the program Patricia ran: no child would ever be invisible again. Not to teachers, not to staff, not to the woman on the corner. The transformation took 2 years. By the time Marcus entered high school, the bullying rate at his middle school had dropped by 62%. The Patricia W. Safe Passage Program had been adopted by 17 other districts in 3 states. Patricia retired from her morning corner at 70, but she still showed up on the first day of every school year to hand out sandwiches and remind the new crossing guards what their job really was. And on the wall of the school's main hallway, a framed drawing hung behind glass. A stick figure with brown skin, a yellow vest, and a halo with the words, "You were my angel when I needed one most," written in a child's handwriting. Marcus had given it to Patricia that first Christmas after his father returned, 5 years after she'd given him his first granola bar, and it was the only thing she'd ever asked to display. Patricia never wanted a program named after her. She never wanted a salary that made headlines or a framed drawing in a school hallway. She wanted children to cross the street safely. She wanted the ones who were drowning to know that one adult saw them. That was it. And that, in the end, was everything. Here's what this story is really about. It's not about a billionaire who showed up with black cars and a guilty conscience. It's about the woman who was already there before he arrived, and the thousands of people just like her who stand on corners and sweep hallways and monitor lunchrooms and drive buses and never make the news. The people who notice which child walks alone. The people who hand over their own lunch because a kid is hungry. The people who become a wall between a bully and a victim without anyone ever telling them to. 1 out of every 5 students reports being bullied. That's not just a statistic. That's 5 children in every classroom, 20 in every grade, hundreds in every school, all of them looking for someone to see them. Patricia saw one, and because she did, a boy who was invisible became a boy who was protected, then a boy who was loved, then a young man who knew he mattered. The question isn't whether there are more Marcuses out there. The question is whether there are more Patricias. And the answer is yes, if we choose to see them, if we choose to be them. If you are moved by this story, share it with someone who needs to remember that what they do matters, even if nobody is watching. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories about the invisible people who hold the world together. And next time you pass a crossing guard, or a custodian, or a lunch lady, look them in the eye. Learn their name. You might be looking at someone who is saving a child's life, one granola bar at a time.